Hey all, welcome back to the Rhythm Section, brought to you by The Mind Refinery. I'm your host, Corbin Blair. This week, Kyle and I are talking about DMX, his legacy, and what he meant to us. We hope you enjoy it. And if you like what you hear, remember to rate, review, and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. Let's get into the show.
So we're back here with the Rhythm Section. We're here today on a somber note to remember the life and times of DMX. We're going to reflect on his music, kind of talk about what it meant to us, and his legacy. I'm joined, as always, by Kyle. Kyle, how are you doing today?
Doing great. Wish we were having this podcast under better circumstances than this, but I think he's an important artist that we got to talk about.
Yeah, it sucks to be doing this with an artist, of his caliber, with any artist, of course, but, someone who I believe was foundational to, growing up. My music tastes, he was, everywhere, very ubiquitous, and just overall a very important figure.
I think that people overlook that idea of him being, fundamental to some people's music, especially people around, like my age or your age, you know what I mean? It's there's a place and a time this music takes it to.
Yeah, I think for some reason he's not. And I think he will be more so now, but he kind of wasn't really mentioned with his contemporaries for a lot of it. And I think his accomplishments, were a little bit undervalued because he was, just performing at such a high rate. And I think, it's kind of a thing where like the time that he was performing in and what happened, post his era and how his peers kind of elevated out of that. I think that's kind of changed the conversation on him a little bit.
Yeah, I completely agree, because you have people coming out and even like Kendrick Lamar rapping about, what it did, what the music did. And I think that is really going to, there's a lot of groups or individuals throughout music where that happens. And you don't really get to appreciate, like what's happening until, what an artist did, like the Velvet Underground, very influential, but you didn't really kind of see how important they were until generations of musicians afterwards kind of framed that they were influenced by them.
Yeah, and I think that's what we're going to see a lot with DMX too. And I think if you were really looking for it, listening to music in the last, 20 or so years, it was pretty obvious the ways that DMX had impacted people, but we're going to dive into that right now. So let's talk about DMX for a second here. Like, he's born Earl Simmons, December 18th, 1970, and he passed away last week, April 9th, 2021. And a very instrumental rapper and actor from Yonkers, New York. I believe the School Street Projects. He made a huge impact on the scene. He kind of came into prominence in the post Biggie and Pac era. Music was shifting a lot. It was very much the shiny suit era when DMX started making his impact on the game, and he was backed by the Rough Riders as like the leader of them. We saw, countless New York acts kind of have to shift what they were doing in response to DMX. So in 1998, he dropped It's Dark and Hell is Hot. Same year, he also dropped Flesh of My Flesh, Blood of My Blood. And then a couple months later in 1999, he dropped And Then There Was X. So he dropped 3 albums all within a 18-month period, and they all went platinum, which I don't think we'll see ever again from an artist. And I think that really speaks to, his prominence and also the era.
Yeah, I think people overlook how much of a quote unquote power vacuum there was post, Biggie and Tupac, because you have Jay-Z coming out and his music is good. He isn't the power broker he becomes yet. We're pre-Kanye, and there's this, gap where he is dominating it. He's propping up Def Jam for a good period of time. along with Jay-Z, so I'm not. I think that, some people, they accuse people of being revisionist when an artist passes away, but I think, this is just something that isn't talked about enough because, you're packed in between two groups of luminaries. You know what I mean? You're packed in between Biggie and Tupac and fucking, Kanye West and Jay-Z. So I think you can get lost in the shuffle, but if you're really paying attention to what happened during those periods of time, it's really DMX who's leading the pack.
Yeah, and I think it's a thing that's easy to miss, because of how big Jay-Z became and how influential he became, years later. But he was never, the powerhouse of rap music like he is today in that era. Like, he was always getting outsold by, various other artists who were kind of, the hotter artists of that era, Jay-Z, being my favorite rapper. But I think there's a lot of kind of misunderstanding of what the time periods were and, who was the hottest around in that time period. And I think Jay-Z kind of wins on consistency, but then you have like, the Maces of the day, the DMXs, like Nelly, everyone who's kind of in that era selling a lot of records. And I think DMX kind of stands out in the pack because he's from New York. He brings a new sound, and he's also like friendly with Jay-Z. He's, friendly with Ja Rule to a point, both like, friendships that were kind of like very competitive at times. What would you say was your introduction to DMX?
Well, on the pod last week, I talked about Grade 9 and how, Rough Riders Anthem was everywhere, and that was the first immersion into it. But I think it was really working in kitchens later in high school. I worked at Jack Astor's, and then the Keg. And, like, you're in the kitchen. Anybody who's worked in a kitchen knows what I'm talking about. There's always these, like, CDs that were on the regular playlist, you know what I mean? Because this is before streaming, so not streaming, before Spotify and all that. So, and even, fucking iPods, dating myself. So there's like a little bit of a rotation of CDs that you would have. Someone would bring their book in, I'd bring my book in, I would just go to the mall, buy a bunch of CDs, and fucking bring them back to work and stuff. And it was, It's Dark and Hell is Hot was one of the ones we listened to so much. Like, we played the fuck out of it. And that's where I actually got to listen to the album tracks, because you start to get into these songs that just playing over and over again. You're starting to listen to it and you're starting to know it, and then knowing lyrics to songs that you don't even necessarily know the track name to yet. That's where I really, really got into it. In fact, I would say that I got into hip hop, because I was talking about my Aunt Alicia, older aunt. It's kind of like my older sister, sorry. But where I really came to know it and get knowledge of it was in kitchens, prepping stuff, listening to the stuff over and over and over and over and over again. And It's Dark and Hell is Hot was one of those albums that was listened to. And the singles are great, but there's album tracks on there that are so fucking incredible that I'm just like, this is good. And I think it's probably, it's his best album. And I just think that almost every single song on it is fantastic. And that was what really caught me into DMX being more than just, flashing out singles, because they were big singles, but it just, the breadth of work, because at times the music was funky, and at times it was raw, and it was just all these different things kind of coming together, and it was unafraid to be any of the things it was. And I just kind of really loved that. And you could get hype on it, you could get introspective on it. It was good you could chill on it a bit. It was that's kind of what really kind of brought me into DMX, and understanding right away that there was a level he was playing at compared to other people at the time, because he was the luminary.
Yeah, and I think so much of DMX is kind of shrouded in mystery in some ways, because he was such a driving force. I think for me, It's Dark and Hell is Hot and Flesh by Flesh, those are albums that I remember just seeing always at HMV as a kid. And there were definitely albums that I wasn't allowed to have, being 7 years old when they both came out. But I remember pointing to, Flesh of My Flesh, and I wanted that album because, it was an album that everyone at school was talking about in that time period. And like I knew the singles, like as you know, singles as a kid, kind of just heard on the radio or like coming out of cars or whatever. And I remember my mom taking one look at the album cover and just telling me that I would never own that album in my life. So yeah, I remember the power of the imagery that he was using, and like in a lot of ways, I think, you know, Eminem gets ascribed the horrorcore label a lot, and we look later on at Odd Future and other acts in that kind of genre, and I think DMX kind of gets left out of the conversation there in his contributions to that genre within rap, because he was, you know, making songs that really fit that mold. And you know, when I listen to Damien on Flesh of My Flesh, which I think is... Wait, sorry, is that on Flesh of My Flesh? No, I think that might be later on.
Because there's 3 Damiens. I'm trying to remember what albums they're on. I think the first one, Damien's on It's Dark and Hell's Hot, the first one.
Okay, it's Dark as Hell Hot. And I think that song, like, alone, you know, it reminds me of, you know, the Eminem songs of the era, and he's playing with voices. It reminds me of, you're hearing like influence of Biggie.
Yeah, like on Give Me the Loot, where it's like the 2 people, you know, the 2 guys robbing shit. He does the 2, like the high pitched voice. Yeah, I didn't even think about that.
Yeah, and I think that's like, you know, it's amazing. I love concept records like that one, and that one, you know, is such an important record. And I think that's, you know, one that Kendrick Lamar points to as being specifically influential to him. And like you see it a lot with Kendrick's music, with the voice changes and the narrative arcs. So I think that like DMX came out the gate so hard. You had Swiss Beats, you know, kind of there from day one. Rough Riders Anthem, like completely inescapable, just a huge smash hit. How It's Going Down, like I think as a love song, as like a softer song, is also amazing. And Get At Me Dog, and like the barking.
Get At Me Dog is so fucking good.
It's so good. And like it was just very stripped down and raw compared to, you know, a lot of what was going on in the era. But he was also like collaborating with everyone else who was like around in that era. So
it's funny about his, just because, you know, and I definitely don't think it's an act, because he grew up, it's rough, and, you know, he admits later, you know, and even not even later, at the time as well on the music, that, you know, there is absolute trauma that's affected him. You know, he's still kind of, you know, he's got this menace, but very open to ideas and collaborations and artistic relationships and growing things from there. And kind of just through that, having an understanding of being grateful for being afforded that opportunity. And I think like every time you see him, there's a level of humble that he has that isn't in a lot of rappers if you watch interviews.
Yeah, I think like, you know, in this kind of post death period, and, you know, just kind of soaking up everything, his interviews I think hold like true the longest, and they really speak to who he was, you know, outside of the headlines, outside of the music. And, you know, you're seeing like he's telling like real stories in his interviews, and the same stories, you know, carry on through the music. But he's such a larger than life figure, while also being so humble and so down to earth. And I think that, you know, we don't see that too often in superstars.
Yeah, you're not seeing it too much. I mean, there's always posturing and it's branding and all these other things thrown into it, but his music is, and just his attitude towards and positivity towards it, despite kind of all the bad shit that's happened, was always inspiring. I liked that you talked about just the storytelling tradition with him, and, you know, taking from artists like Biggie. Because, I mean, he's really, like, his stuff is really narrative driven, and you see it on, like, Crime Story, which that is probably maybe one of my 1-2 favorite songs on It's Dark and Hell's Hot. It's just really cool. It's got an unconventional beat. I think it's just a bongo kind of, or like a conga or something, like very tapped out. And it's really just really good, and it's telling the story, not even relying on like bars or verses. It's just sometimes the stream of conscious narrative, and it really kind of transports you to a place and to a certain lifestyle that, and that's why it hit hard in the suburbs, right? Because it hit that critical mass across the United States, across North America, across the world. And a lot of that is to do with the storytelling tradition that he really kind of employs with it, which is absolutely fantastic.
So his singles seem to have like an almost inescapable nature, like, resonated across movies, TV, obviously on the radio, like everywhere. Party between like Party Up in Here, Get At Me Dog, Rough Riders Anthem, Where the Hood At. How would you, start to describe his genre to people who might be unfamiliar with him?
I think coming out of the era that he was coming out of, I think the inclination is to say that it's gangster rap. But the thing with gangster rap is that it doesn't usually talk about redemption. Like some, people will be like, obviously you haven't listened to this. It's, yeah, there is tracks about redemption, and there's sometimes, but a lot of it is about a certain way of life, conveying a certain way of life, and then as it evolves, glorifying a certain way of life. And there was this always this back and forth in his music where between who he is and was and who he has to become. It's always like a back and forth between redemption and and what he has to do to survive. So I think if you wanted a music that expressed both the light and dark about living in the streets and operating in the streets, that's what it is. I don't know how I can kind of frame it with a single like buzz term, but it really kind of shows both sides of what it is, like, and is consequential as well.
Yeah, like I remember having a conversation with my friend, and he kind of put him in the gangster rap category, and I was like, I don't see DMX as a gangster rapper at all. Like, even though he has stories that are pretty raw, and he's from New York, and he's telling it in such a way, but like I think he bounces between like horrorcore elements. He is giving you, at times, like, it reminds me of like Boot Camp Click, Onyx, that kind of braggadocious, really raw.
Onyx is the one that really hits for me in terms of where I think what he's like,
Yeah, I think so too. And I think that like it reminds me of the early New York kind of really stripped down boom bap, but there's elements of like pop in there a little bit. He kind of reminds me sometimes maybe like of the Ludacris, like later Ludacris stuff that would come out, kind of echoes some of what DMX was doing there. But it was it was wide encompassing, and there was a lot of emotion behind it too. Like I wouldn't call it like emo rap, like quote unquote, but he was never afraid to be himself or to be raw or to be in touch with his emotions. And I think that if you kind of don't know his music that well, you might kind of want to point to gangster rap because of maybe the imagery or,
Well, the singles. I think that's the thing.
Maybe the singles.
Is the singles, right? Because when you this is the problem with just going by the singles, and why I don't think you can rate an album just like it's common sense. You can't rate an album just by the singles, because the album tracks is where you start to really spiral into the headspace if it's a good album. And Stark as Hell and Hell is Hot like really does that. Flesh of My Flesh as well does that. It takes you to the story. I love Jay-Z, and he's probably in my my top 3 favorite rappers, because if I listen to, like, even with all the bombast and the posturing that Jay-Z does, if you listen to Jay-Z's albums, about Jay-Z, his life and what he's gone through. Like, he's told that story, and DMX has done that as well.
Yeah, and I would definitely agree there. I think that, like, with DMX's kind of output and legacy, I think a lot of people didn't really get past the singles, despite him selling, multiple platinum albums. I think that maybe to a younger sector's generation, they don't really understand who DMX was outside of the singles that they heard everywhere. And I think that's kind of like a disservice. And I hope that, now that he is passed, that people kind of look back and put a light on some of the topics that he was speaking about on the deep cuts, and just get a better sense of who he was on the whole.
Yeah, and I feel like the singles, especially in that era, singles really kind of overtook what the I mean, that's where you really see the erosion, the beginning of the erosion of the album for a while. You know what I mean? And we talk about it kind of making its comeback in the last little bit, but like it's the singles become the whole thing, and you lose that, and you start to lose what the overall quality of the albums are. But like especially his first 3 albums are like they're really good. They're really well put together, and I mean, some of them are a little bit more tracks than I like, as anybody who listens to the show knows, but they're consistent, and they sold consistently for good reason.
So we've mentioned Jay-Z obviously a couple times here because they were, definitely contemporaries. We haven't really talked about Ja Rule and that connection yet. But, there was a point in time when they were going to do a supergroup with the 3 of them. So Jay-Z, Ja Rule, and DMX. I believe we got a cover of Double XL with the 3 of them on it, and it was going to be called Murder Inc. So we got I think a few tracks with the 3 of them on it. How do you think hip-hop would have been impacted if we did get that supergroup, in the early 2000s?
Counter question, if this supergroup was put together, would Fire Festival have worked out better for Ja Rule? Would he have had the pull to make it happen? I'm just throwing it out there.
That's a good question. I think he would.
You because you got a little bit of that Jay-Z backing, not this fucking, I don't know. Listen, my prejudices towards the music of Ja Rule aside, I mean, this probably would have been kind of fucking awesome, right? Like, especially just Jay-Z and DMX. Like, I apologize if I'm hating on Ja Rule, but like, this would have been really cool. There would have been cool. This would have been something where the album, like, can you imagine how hyped this music would have been?
Yeah, and I'm a big fan of all 3 of them, and I think Ja Rule kind of doesn't get enough flowers for his contributions to rap in the early 2000s and, his crossover appeal. I wonder, if we got that group, if we would have seen 50 Cent be able to come into rap and impact the same way and to kind of, do what he did, because I think that would have maybe closed up that lane a bit for him. Like, he kind of made his point to beef everybody around, and obviously he had a long-standing rivalry with Ja Rule, but I think, his some shots at 50, I don't think Jay-Z, I don't think he would have wanted to get into it if the 3 of them were, kind of united and they had a presence on the charts and
it definitely would have
and stuff.
It definitely would have reshaped his relationship with Ja Rule for sure, because Ja Rule would have had, I mean, like, Ja Rule, you can't touch these 3 if they're together, right? Like, that's like, especially at that time, you're getting a lot of the weight of hip hop, but at the same time, I know, like, 50 Cent is on, I'm trying to remember what fucking, I think there's a 50 Cent feature on, and then there was X, or was it the next one? I can't remember. So like, he was like, DMX was like getting him on it too. I'm wondering, I think that's a valid question though, just about the overall impact, because like when 50 Cent came in, it was a massive impact on the industry and like had a massive effect on hip hop. I'm wondering if it's just a little less tempered because 50 Cent was filling a particular situation that wasn't happening at the time.
Yeah, and I see, some influence from DMX in 50 in his early work. And I just wonder, if that kind of spot was occupied by like a New York supergroup, if there would have been space for 50 to shake New York up the way he did, because he was, allowed to do that because Ja Rule was, so poppy at the time, and DMX was, a bit less active, and Jay-Z was thinking about retiring. So I think it was a perfect power vacuum, again, in the same way, like other power vacuums we've discussed. Yeah.
It definitely pulls in a different direction. I mean, like, it has its own gravitational pull if it comes together. That's the thing with artists of that size, is that, who's coming in being on it? You know what I mean? Who's coming in on it? Are we getting, like, the possibilities become endless, and it becomes one of those big musical what ifs. Who's to say I wouldn't have liked Ja Rule if he was with those guys? All of a sudden, my whole it's butterfly effect type situation here. Like, how many rap supergroups are better than that if that comes together?
Yeah, I don't know, and like, I don't think we we didn't really see that many in the early 2000s like that would be comparable to that level. So I think that would have, definitely shifted everything up, and it would have been a big uniting factor in New York at the time.
They would have been the Heatles.
Yeah, you said it.
I said it.
So I'd say like DMX was like, very in touch with his emotions, as I kind of hinted at before. Despite his gruff delivery, he really made a lot of heartfelt songs about his upbringing and his life situation. He was very in touch with his Christianity. I love Huey B's elements and topics like, just about the system and society. Slipping is, a very personal song. How do you think his legacy kind of contributed to breaking down some of the walls of emotions and, masculinity in rap?
What I like about Slippin' and it coming out like on the second album and just like in the first year is that it sets a really big emotional tone. Not that stuff off It's Dark and Hell is Hot didn't. It sets a very emotional tone as well. It's just that Slippin' got a little bit more attention than some of the album tracks on It's Dark as Hell. It's Dark and Hell is Hot. It really fucking great track. I mean, there's an honesty about his music. I mean, he owns his shit generally, and, he found God later in, he really kind of found God again later in his life, and that was really included in his music. I mean, one thing about really great rappers and artists, as I said, is if you listen to their albums, you kind of get a glimpse of their life and where they've been and where they're going and, like, what their spirituality is. And I think that as DMX got older, I think his music did fall off, but I don't think it was necessarily from a pen standpoint. Because even when he was being boastful, there was like a substance to it, and a darkness and light playing and together, and he was unabashed about all these different things he went through in his life, and didn't hide from it, and owning that every step of the way. And you see him going back between sin and redemption. And I think if a guy who's that quote unquote hard in an industry that is especially at that time, was defined by machismo and, testosterone and, being tough. If this guy who has clearly had a bad life and is clearly tough is willing to be out there and put himself on the line and wear his heart on his sleeve, there is something to take influence from that. And I think that's where you see, like listen, you see guys like 50 Cent and stuff, and 50 Cent, his impact is immeasurable. Like, DMX, he doesn't really tell you tons about him from an emotional standpoint and his feelings, and DMX does that. And that's why a guy like Kendrick Lamar comes out, because he feels that, and feels that there is something more than just fucking Rough Riders Anthem, which is a fantastic fucking track. It's just like, it becomes too much of the thing when the people in the know about like the levels he's able to take it from, like a self-expression standpoint.
Yeah, and I think that like he was someone who kind of made it okay to do these things and to talk about these things. And, I think that a lot of times people kind of don't give hip hop enough credit for, its content, its lyrical content, and the emotions it talked about and expressed, because they see hip hop as this one way, or these gangster tracks, or whatever it is. So like these things have been always present in hip hop, and they will continue to be. But I think that DMX was a bastion of it, where he could be this really hard DMX, like the dogs, the motorbikes, that kind of thing. And he also, on the same album, he would give you a lighter side of him, and he would really talk about his upbringing. And I think that's important. I think the duality of DMX is something that I've seen often repeated, and we're hearing about in stories and interviews and everything. It's just that how complex and how big a heart he had. And I think to me speaks the most about DMX, and I think that is just always reflected in his career.
Absolutely.
So DMX
continue.
Yeah, so DMX, realized what seems like fairly early on that he wasn't getting properly compensated for his music. There's a story that was floating around about Def Jam executives buying DMX a car, and then him going back to his accountant and realizing that the car was bought out of his earnings. So he branched out into acting, which is not an uncommon thing, and dating back to Will Smith and the Fresh Prince, and various actors have rapped and various rappers have acted. But he appeared in films like Belly in 1998, Romeo Must Die with Aaliyah and Jet Li in 2000, Exit Wounds, and Cradle to the Grave. What do you think about DMX's acting career, and have you seen many movies that he's been in?
I've probably seen definitely all the movies here. As many people know who listen to the wider Mind Refinery podcastography, I come from a family who loves fucking action movies, especially ones that aren't, particularly highbrow. I've seen all of them. Romeo Must Die is my favorite. It's fucking awesome. It's not high cinema, but it is like he can act. Like that's 100. That's the thing. And I think he could have acted in other stuff as well. But Romeo Must Die was sick. He worked so well with Jet Li. I mean, Exit Wounds is what it is.
Steven Seagal's in it. What are you going to do about it?
Yeah, this is what I'm saying. And my big note here, I'm just like looking at what I've typed. It's like when he's not with Steven Seagal, perfect. When he's with Jet Li, that's fine because it's like they can play off each other. He's, a little bit more boisterous. Jet Li is quiet, so it kind of works out. Aaliyah was in Romeo Must Die as well. Is it that the one she was in?
Yes, that's the one she's in.
Yeah, she's fantastic. R.I.P. So yeah, I mean, I loved it. Like these fucking DMX movies were fucking awesome, and he was in cool movies. I think that I really can't believe that he never got a chance to be in Fast and the Furious. I think Ludacris just kind of I feel like he'd be good.
Ja Rule had it first, and he kind of flopped on it. We just saw the trailer for the new one, and
Ludacris
Ja Rule, I think
Ludacris is better.
He took over for him pretty much.
Yeah, definitely.
I mean, you don't seem to be a big Ja Rule fan, so
I'm not. You know what though? Hold on a second here. It's correct, but listen, maybe I'm being unfair, and some people will listen to this and just immediately be like, what the fuck is wrong with you? But I want to know what you think about Belly. That is what I want to know. Do you like Belly?
Belly is one of my favorite hip hop movies. From the opening sequence, it plays out, some of Nas's lyrics from Illmatic. There's some great scenes. I think DMX floored me. This is his first role, I'm pretty sure, and he just really, really did a good job in it. I love Hype Williams. It was over the top. I would say it's almost like a new blaxploitation or like a little bit of a B movie, but with it's really well shot to me. Very big music video aesthetics, and I think I really love that movie, and I've seen it multiple times. Any scene with DMX in Jamaica is golden.
DMX in Jamaica,
I can't wait to watch it again.
He can this is what I'm saying. He can act. I thought that he maybe should have got more opportunities outside of this kind of stuff, because in Belly, that's a movie I've watched so many fucking times, and I don't know, it's like one big long Hype Williams video. So
I feel like I watched that movie on an iPod Classic at one point, and maybe some of our listeners won't know what that is, but
iPod Classic,
a very, very, very small screen to watch a movie on.
I will say this, the iPod Classic, it's like a fucking dumpster for fucking music. Huge fucking I still got mine. But yeah, I mean,
I would take a new one if they made one. I would be
if they made it, they should do that. Make another. It's friggin' because sometimes I don't want my phone, my music together, all this kind of shit. You know how it is. Or it's a whole other podcast. But yeah, I mean, DMX I think he's definitely one of the better, rapper actors for sure. I think he just generally got it.
Yeah, I wish he got more roles. Outside of these four, I would say 3 of them, or maybe all 4, are his big movies. He has an appearance in the Chris Rock movie Top 5 later on, within the last decade. But outside of that, he did a lot of direct to DVD movies, which are probably, I don't know, direct to Amazon or direct to Netflix movies now.
Yeah,
would be the equivalent. But I think that he was a fantastic actor, and I know he, had a lot of personal struggles, so that might have precluded him from, picking up more roles. But I wish he had more roles in top tier movies. I could see him like included in, some of the action movies that, have been produced in the last like 10 to 15 years. Like he could have had great, like, small roles in those.
Listen, if Gerard Butler can land leading roles, then fucking DMX can fucking act in something worthwhile, because come on, like he's good.
So while we're on the topic of his acting, during the filming of Exit Wounds here in Toronto, DMX was in town shooting. He also happened to make a cameo appearance riding an ATV in Canadian rock band Sum 41's Makes No Difference video off their first EP. Did you catch that cameo when it aired on Much Music?
Yes, because we watched the shit out of it, and because we always had Much Music on all the time, like just constantly, just on in the background. And he comes in, I think it's the car crashes through the house, and it's like a wide shot, but then, and he comes in the kind of the fucking wide shot, but then you get a good few seconds like directly at his face, and I thought that was cool, because like he seems like such a super serious person, and then he does cool stuff like this, and you're like, this guy has a sense of humor. So yes, we caught it right away. Also, people were like talking about it at school and shit, like, yo, this is happening, this happened, oh, he's on this, and fantastic. I loved it. I like this kind of shit. I love it when when people show up in videos like that.
Yeah, I mean, I'm a huge music video fan. I love everything about the art, and I think cameos are, just like, I love having moments like this that we can kind of look back on, and especially when we lose somebody like DMX and be like, hey, he appeared in this pop punk video in 2001. Like, what the heck? That's such like a rare moment, and it's such a special moment. Mm-hmm. How do you think this happened though? I'm wondering like who made the calls, and like who was like, we need DMX in this.
I guess my question is, Def Jam's parent company at the time, do you remember what it was? Because they went.
It would be Universal.
I'm wondering if it's the same. Is it the same labels? That's kind of what I'm wondering.
I think that's what it might be, because Sum 41 was on Island, so Island eventually fused with Def Jam to become Island Def Jam. I think they've since split up now. It was back when I think Vivendi owned both companies.
Yeah.
So it seems like it's most likely. That just seems like a weird call, or like I wonder if there was like
they probably knew he was filming,
someone like in the marketing.
Yeah. They probably knew he was in town. Needed someone to do that, and they're just like, yo, let's see if he'll do it. We're on the same label. I wonder if we can make that happen. That seems like a we're smoking weed kind of thing. Like, that seems like a we smoked weed and came up, we're like, yo, we should do that. Yo, DMX would be great in this. He's in fucking town. That's fucking crazy. He's the biggest rapper in the world right now. Yeah, I fucking love that.
I'd love to hear from Sum 41, like, and ask them about like that day and what filming that scene was like, because that's just like so amazing to me.
Yeah, all the background in there and stuff. You come in and the fucking DMX is there. Like, how fucking sick. Like, that's the thing about music videos, and I just kind of like generally miss about shooting music videos. It's just like how fun they are. They are absolutely a blast to shoot. Most of the time, there are times where they are not, because usually you're just kind of, even if they have big budgets, you're kind of just having fun and playing with concepts and stuff, and like it's cool stuff like that happening on them is what makes them really cool. Dude driving through, I want to know how they got, like, what's like the house, like how would they?
I wonder where that house is. That needs to be like a video series, like looking at that house now, or like asking like the owners or something like that. That would be really fun to find out about.
Because I was thinking about it too. Like, I did this video, music video. I can't remember for the fucking band. It was with the last production company that I had, and we directed a music video where a dude drove a motorcycle through a dollar store, and we had access to the dollar store because the lead singer's dad was a property manager, or like he did fucking industrial real estate. So like this place was closing down. It used to be a dollar store, so we got to just basically trash it before it got sold and ripped down. And I was like, okay, this is a weird circumstance that we were allowed to do that. And then I was watching that video and I'm like, who let this happen? That was the number one question. Who let DMX ride a fucking, ATV through the house? Like, I'm like, were they tearing it down? Were they selling it? Like, question mark.
Yeah, I want like a mini documentary on this. This is my ask for this year.
It's a good idea.
So since his death, we've heard multiple stories about DMX's nature, his ability to connect with people. Like, are there any ones that like have floated around that you heard of that you wanted to, share or talk about or thought were funny?
I mean, generally, it's more the accumulation of the stories and remembering how he affected his community and it's even more glaring now that, because, we hear stories about him not being, compensated properly, just like his level of generosity to the community and being generous in his interviews about sharing the things that are, were troubling him and that were holding him back, and being generous with that in terms of sharing it with people so people can see it. Like, he was, that kind of is the not the criticism, sorry, the stories that really are coming out, and that people just really liked fucking working with him.
Yeah, like, I think that, like, you just get a full sense of who he was outside of the music when you start to hear some of the stories. Like, I remember seeing a video of him dancing at this Albanian wedding.
The Albanian wedding video is fucking, and then the roller coaster.
Yeah, that's just, him on the roller coaster is like such a classic video. Like, it's so great. I remember that other story too about him in London in like 2003, and he was like, supposed to get the chauffeur to drive him to a venue or a music video shoot or something like that. But he told the chauffeur he was going to be driving instead. Obviously, he's driving in London, like probably shouldn't be driving in London. And he just drives to a toy store and buys a bunch of, I think he buys like those like model planes, and there's a kid in the toy store with him, and he invites the kid to go to the park with like him and his mom and like his whole entourage, and they go fly this like toy plane in the park, and at the end DMX signs it and then goes to whatever he has to go to, and he just like gives this kid this autograph, like a couple $100 plane. And I think that's just such an amazing story.
Just takes time to make a kid's day.
Yeah, like, just for like, at the height of his stardom and at the height of his career, just like amazing.
How many people are doing that? Right? Yeah. Like, how many people are doing that kind of shit?
So I think also, with DMX, we've talked a lot about his music and his career and his output. Where are you seeing DMX's influences in music today? Like, who are there any artists to you that, you've been listening to where you're like, oh yeah, I can kind of see where DMX kind of fits into their, family tree, or, you see kind of flashes of DMX and what he brought to the game through them?
I saw it in definitely members of G Unit, because I just, like, I felt like I saw it more in someone like Lloyd Banks than I saw in 50 Cent, because Lloyd Banks was just always a little bit more, again, a bit, not totally, but it was a bit more reflective of just like what that situation is and that kind of shit, like on the documentary. But I mean, again, we've mentioned it a number of times. Kendrick Lamar seems to make the most sense, because I mean, he leans a little more on the less braggadocious side, but like there is that playing with light and dark and being, and just knowing that you can openly talk about your spirituality in a sense. Like, if you look at To Pimp a Butterfly, there's a lot about his spirituality and being close to God, far from God, how his life and what turned out, and, his street rivalries and all that kind of stuff had that effect on. And I think, again, that's where DMX, looms large. I'm always tripped out that Drake cites him as an influence. I don't know. I mean, like, it's just funny. I mean, obviously I fucks with Drake. He's fantastic. But I'm always like, kind of like, where in the Forest Hill did that shit come from?
Yeah, I think, like, Kendrick cites Damien as an inspiration for the character of Lucy, who appears on his album. And I think that, when you have the Drake kind of flipping how it's going down on You With Me on views, I like that kind of came out.
Yeah, that was cool.
It came out of nowhere, but I think it was super. He really pulled, those elements out of DMX, and I think that's like, it speaks to, how varied and how complex DMX was, that you could like pull that inspiration and you know, completely change the song and you know, kind of make it into something else. But like, it's really getting it down to the brass tacks of what that song was. And I think that way of, you know, pulling inspiration is, you know, is really commendable by someone like Drake, to be like, okay, let me look at the superstars you know, that I grew up on, and let me pull in different ways. Cause like, that's, I think, automatically going to happen. You know, anyone you listen to, you're going to get kind of soak it up in osmosis. So, you know, when Kendrick kind of mentions DMX or Eminem or all these other people, you can kind of hear it in different songs and different aspects of who they are. And I think that, you know, Drake being the superstar that he is, like pulling from DMX in that way. And I think there's other kind of various references to DMX throughout Drake's catalog. And I think that it really speaks to, you know, the outlook and also just how big DMX was and how varied and what he had to offer.
I think it definitely speaks to Drake kind of knowing what's important and being able to kind of translate that and, you know, find value in things that maybe don't always make a lot of sense sonically all the way, but then when you really actually look at it more like not superficially and, you know, pick things apart, it's all there. And, you know, great artists are influenced by great artists, and that it makes complete sense. It makes the music is worthy of influencing people, and, you know, Drake's savvy, so he saw the value in it and incorporated it into his sound when it might not seem obvious, but it more seems deft at this point.
So looking back on it, we've like talked about a lot of different aspects of DMX, who he was, you know, the albums that meant a lot to us. How do you think he will be remembered on a whole, and how do you think hip hop will remember him?
I've spent a lot of time going through like top 50 and top 100 lists in terms of like the greatest hip hop albums of all time. So, you know, first of all, like the two, like if you're looking at what is the legacy and how hip hop will remember him, how popular music will remember him, he's arguably It's Dark and Hell is Hot is in the top 50 rap albums of all time. It's absolutely in the top 100 rap albums of all time. And if you consider how many rap albums are put out on a regular basis, that's a fucking lot. And that is a big thing. He's in with Luminaries, and that is an album that is for the ages. I mean, his first 3 albums were critically acclaimed. His third album was certified 5 times platinum. He's had 5 number 1 records in a row. Was it 5 to debut at number 1? In a row? I know his first 2 albums debuted at number 1 in the same fucking year, which is never... I'm pretty sure that's the only time that's happened. I think that in the same calendar year. Like, that is... like, it's mind-boggling when you consider how low-key it seems now, but it was huge back then. And like, these are hallmarks of the greats, and if anyone slept on how popular he was, I think when he did the verses thing with Snoop Dogg, it really kind of, and I'm so glad that happened. I'm so glad that, you know, that is, because obviously it's a year later he's passing away, and a lot has been said about, you know, his troubles with the government, his troubles with, you know, drug addiction, you know, and all the things. And instead of like focusing on, you know, the negativity, which he never denied and he never ran away from, he tried to fight it head on, and that is courageous. And that we got that last look of that look of him, you know what I mean? That the older DMX is remembered through giving this really awesome moment amidst this fucking, like, a moment of communal enjoyment where everyone's talking about it and, you know, like making jokes about it and fucking making memes in this whole terrible fucking pandemic. It was like a really big bright spot in the earlier part of it, and I just am glad that it's him who got to do that, and that he got to, you know, like, that's the thing, you know what I mean? That's one of the big ways we'll remember him. And now there's so many conversations going on about just how prolific he was, and I'm just, as a guy who didn't deserve this kind of fate, it's great that he at least, like, the legacy, I believe, will be secure.
Yeah, I definitely agree there. And I think that the Versus was such a great moment and an outpouring of love for DMX and just a time for people to reflect on him while he was still here with us. And I think that that's important because I don't think a lot of artists get that. And, I think that really speaks to how big and how important Versus has been during the pandemic, even going forward. So I'm glad that that happened. And, I think even when that was happening, it made me kind of go back and reevaluate, my version of DMX in my head, because I think I absorbed a lot of DMX through osmosis and through, listening to records through other people and on the radio and stuff like that. So just kind of going back and appreciating all his albums. And I'm glad that, we have all his music that he gave us and, it's at our fingertips and we can kind of sit with it and just really enjoy, who he was on the whole. So I think he's going to be really well remembered. And I think we're going to see a lot of people kind of start to emulate, certain things that he had brought into music, certain things that, videos. And I think that his legacy will be forever entrenched. And I think that, now with his passing, as, often happens, but I think that he will be more cemented and better remembered than he was before this, because he really is a foundational artist, foundational to East Coast hip hop, foundational to a lot of genres within hip hop. And yeah, I just think that I'm going to be over the next couple of weeks watching a lot of his movies and just continuing to listen and continuing to appreciate who he was and what he meant.
I think when people, especially artists, pass away, there is some nostalgia and mythologizing, but I think with DMX and his passing, people are finally starting to say exactly what should be said.
Yeah, I think I would definitely agree there. Well, Kyle, I want to say thank you so much for joining me on this to talk about DMX and to reflect.
I'm always down for DMX talk.
Yeah, me too. I think we'll be back fairly soon with another episode. But it was important to kind of take this time to appreciate and reflect on DMX.
So yeah, pour one out for our homie DMX.
All right, talk to you guys soon.